The Sonic the Hedgehog franchise is one I have a passive appreciation for. I can't pretend I was ever a big fan of the series or it's some icon of my youth. As far as childhood memories go, we were strictly a Nintendo family, but I actually recall playing the Sonic games on a Sega Genesis at a friend or relative's house a few times. I would even get jealous that I couldn't simply get my mom to buy Sonic 2 for my SNES. Despite that, I stuck with Nintendo for multiple generations. During the Nintendo 64 era, as I was gapping racers in F-Zero X, gaping fools with double blue lasers in Star Fox 64, and losing to bots that don't get tired from stick spinning in Mario Party, I noticed that there wasn't really a new Sonic game on Sega Saturn, their console competing against the Nintendo 64 and Sony PlayStation. At least not one I noticed as a kid. Anyone slightly aware of video games in the late 90s knew how Sonic was Sega's answer to Mario and the Saturn was Sega's brand new console at the time. Nintendo 64 got Super Mario 64 right out the gate, so where's Sonic 64? Sonic Saturn? Sonic 3D Black? Oh wait. But even without its own original Sonic, the Saturn was a pretty cool console with quality games like, Scud? And from my understanding, the console was pretty popular in Japan. In spite of all that, I never even saw a Sega Saturn until I was an adult, more than a decade after it was released. That raw jealousy of Sonic wouldn't re-enter my brain until 1999. I lived in a fairly quiet Jersey neighborhood. Me and my brother were friends with a bunch of kids on the block back then. There was this neighbor around my age. He lived right across the street, but was on a completely different level of privilege than us. He was a straight A honor student at a private school, his parents were rich, and he got most of the new video game hardware that would hit the market. That, of course, included the Sega Dreamcast, the first 6th generation console to hit store shelves for us back in 1999. One day I went over to check it out, and it was my first time witnessing this little eggshell colored beast. I still kind of remember that day and even the house. We were in their finished bar style basement with dark walls and dim lights. I think there was even a pool table and a couch in front of this huge TV illuminating our faces. I recall seeing my friend power on the Dreamcast and I got weirded out by that long beep from the controller and having that serene sound flow into my ears while I witnessed that sweet, sweet swirl for the first time. It was nice. So what awesome exclusive launch title did we pop in that would immediately blow me away? Power Stone. And a little after that, Sonic Adventure. This was the first time I witnessed Sonic in full 3D anything, and it amazed me at just 9 years old. I wouldn't finally get my own piece of 3D Sonic until this game's sequel was ported to Nintendo GameCube about 3 years later. Ever since then, I've been on this roller coaster of interest when it comes to the round blue bastard. I'll talk a bit more about how I reflect on the earlier 3D Sonic games later. It's funny, I made a video years ago that discussed all the main 2D Sonic games that ended with a review of Sonic Mania, only to get bombarded with comments about how I'm wrong, a jerk, a jaded nostalgia fanboy, even though I was pretty critical on particular Sonic games that are universally praised, etc. But hey, I get it. I bully people about Grasshopper games myself, to each their own. And the video wasn't even good, despite that I stand by most of the claims I've made. Either way, this feedback discouraged me from making a follow-up reviewing Sonic Forces where I would have discussed all the mainline 3D Sonic games. But forget that, I'll make whatever video I want. However, I'll admit this is probably the least interesting thing I could cover. How many loud YouTube assholes are already talking about this franchise? But my patrons voted for it, so blame them as I cast my hot take into the inferno of conversation. And I won't be doing this alone. I'm going to be diving into these 3D games with a real Sonic expert. And he must be an expert on Sonic. It's in his name. Please welcome SonicKick.
Well, a ding dong, hello! I forget that I am a Sonic expert, but SonicKick's the name and speeds my game. I've had a few outings with the Sonic games and contain a lot of knowledge about the franchise. Having played them throughout most of my life and being a Sega guy, I'm more than honored to give my insight and thoughts on this series. Also because I've never really devoted time on my actual channel to do so in the past 3 years. So you ready to dive into this Sonic Adventure, Genry?
No, I am not. That's why we're going to take a look at certain projects that preceded Sonic Adventure.
God damn it!
Before getting into Sonic Adventure 1, I wanted to talk a bit about its more dormant period. While Sonic lacked a mainline entry for the 5th generation, it's not like he was completely absent, as we need to consider titles such as Sonic the Fighters, Sonic Jam, and
Sonic R, baby! Yeah! Let's go!
Regardless, the people in Sonic Team, namely Naoto Oshima and Yuji Naka, weren't interested in spearheading a new entry, getting wrapped up in the development for Nights into Dreams immediately after Sonic and Knuckles released. So the only things Sonic would see for this generation were anything but traditional. Why did this happen? I doubt the story of this never-to-be Saturn game is obscure to anyone watching, so I'll try to keep it brief. Sega Technical Institute, the company's American division that created Sonic the Hedgehog 2 with the help of key staff in Japan, was chosen in 1994 to make a new Sonic game for the Sega Saturn, and their assigned goal was essentially to succeed Sonic 3 and Knuckles in a way that utilized 3D gameplay. While that does seem obvious, perhaps Sega needed to clarify their expectations after internal devs were fumbling around with the 32X add-on for the Genesis, along with that peripheral Sonic-based title, Knuckles Chaotix, and man, Sega really did just fuck up with the 32X, huh? The goddamn thing released literally one day before the Sega Saturn hit Japan. Internal Sega devs were working on games for this add-on that probably should have never existed, wasting time and resources that could have been put into supporting the Saturn. Anyway, it would make sense for Sonic to get an original 3D mainline game. Or any mainline game, I guess. At least one, right? You know how Mario got just one mainline game in 3D for the Nintendo 64, right at launch to boot. Yeah, well, apparently Sega, likely out of desperation, asked for 3. I guess Sonic R doesn't entirely count, but why did they not let the already requested Sonic 3D Blast be the Saturn flagship game rather than a swan song of sorts for the Sega Genesis?
It goes back to Sonic X-treme. This game wasn't to just be Sonic in some isometric gameplay that can be done hunky-dory on a 2D-based console. Sega Technical Institute, or STI for short, was working on Sonic's more legitimate transition into the third dimension on the most extreme level, you know? Just like how Super Mario 64 charted a new path for the series that left a trail for others to follow.
That makes more sense. Isometric and overhead 3D-ish games were already achieved on 4th gen consoles plenty of times. Perhaps they didn't think a game like 3D Blast would turn many heads towards the Sega Saturn when their competition looked like this, or this. They wanted something more, well, extreme.
While other ideas were pitched for Sonic games, X-treme was the main focus from late 1994 to 1996. Sonic Team was working on Nights, while STI was working on X-treme for the 32X, but when that wasn't going well, development shifted to the Saturn.
Like I said, wasted time and resources on a Dumbo, dead on arrival, dim-witted add-on.
To put a long story short, important figures to the project left the company. There were internal disagreements, the advanced tech of the boss engine they developed proved difficult to run on the Saturn, and the massive crunch taken upon STI devs like Chris Sen and Christina Coffin, leading to them becoming extremely ill during development. This fledgling Saturn project wasn't churning well behind the scenes. You wouldn't know outside the company because Sega went all in on promoting this barely at alpha stage game like it was just around the corner of going gold. Even to the point where the original run of Sonic ice cream bars had the Sonic X-treme logo on it. You could still find these promotional stickers on certain ice cream trucks. I've even seen them.
Sega was so adamant about banking on this project that it even showed up in shopping catalogs, cover and all. That's how sure they were about releasing this, despite it being famously nowhere near completion at any point. Yeah, get a nice discount on this game. That never existed.
One of the final nails in the coffin was Yuji Naka. He wouldn't let STI use the Nights engine. This happened pretty late into the development of X-treme and might have saved it, but he threatened to quit Sega if they allowed STI to use it. He claims in interviews that he didn't have anything to do with them not using the engine, but I don't believe him because look at the famously cancelled Geist Force. This was being developed as Sega's answer to Star Fox and was being produced within Sega of America. Allegedly, Naka toured the office of the developer and was talking in Japanese to another executive, assuming nobody in Sega of America understood the language, about how we wanted to take the tech for their own use, fire all except one engineer, and bring them onto Sonic Team. In light of this, the team took their tech and ran, and good on them for doing so. Unfortunately, since it was such an expensive game to complete, and the engineers got different jobs, Geist Force was cancelled and its tech was abandoned. So, if reports came out that Naka didn't let other devs use his engine, and he wanted to steal this other team's engine, I'm more inclined to believe the people who aren't behind bars right now.
Enough of the Felon Wonderworld talk and back to Sonic X-treme. Frankly, this project had so much going against it, from a directionless development team, budget terms, core devs falling off, failure to meet progress deadlines, and the Saturn itself being notoriously difficult to design games on compared to its competition. It's no surprise from an outside perspective that they had to cancel it. No one knows how it would have turned out if they forced it to fruition. Can you imagine a bare bones alpha looking build being released at full price a la Bubsy? It could have destroyed the franchise. STI was given such a raw deal. While some of the devs involved did have a hand at a couple mainline Sonic games, telling them they had to make a brand new entry to this established franchise without any of the core Sonic Team devs on new hardware in a new dimension that was becoming a big craze after Sega spent so much time and money dicking around with an add-on piece for the Genesis, I cannot imagine how stressful this task must have been for them. The more I look into this mess of a timeline, the more obvious this was doomed. It's a real shame too. The Saturn got plenty of love in Japan.
Thanks, Sakura Wars!
But I think the Western market needed something to introduce said console to them, and who better than Sonic, the one that introduced them to the Genesis proper. Sir Tungara de Pepperochow III isn't going to fill Sonic's shoes.
Which is why they hastily commissioned a port of 3D Blast for Saturn, but that definitely didn't turn any heads for obvious reasons. Hey kids, get this Sega Genesis game on this new console that looks almost exactly the same!
And while Sonic X-treme's cancellation wasn't the sole factor of the Saturn failing in Western markets, it certainly didn't help matters, as Sega was stuck in a ditch spinning its wheels after making numerous terrible marketing decisions for their first 3D console. In the end, the Saturn heavily undersold, especially compared to the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, even with its success in Japan. It's hard to say how a Sonic Team-based installment would have turned out if that was their chosen path right after Sonic and Knuckles. Would it have been 3D but with 2D gameplay, kinda like Knights? Or I guess Klonoa? Would it have been something a little closer to 3D Blast? Or perhaps something completely different? But enough speculation, as it's time to look toward the first mainline 3D iteration for Sonic that actually did manage to launch.
Eggman の思い通りにはさせないぜ。俺はソニック。Sonic the Hedgehog.
After Sonic X-treme internally crashed and burned, Sonic Team members did start working on a brand new 3D Sonic game intended for the Saturn, with Yuji Naka as main producer and Takashi Iizuka as game director. However, development of the Dreamcast console began. This was being developed as the successor of the Saturn, as Sega simply wanted to try again and get a head start with the next generation just like before. So, Sonic Team cancelled this project, and this is where the Sonic Jam Hub World came from, which is a little more than a gussied up collection of the mainline Genesis games. This Hub World was a fragment of an alpha build created by Naka and Iizuka along with their crew. So the production of the Sonic game would restart, now with the Dreamcast capabilities in mind. And damn, if this game didn't want to let you know you're about to experience an adventure.
Sonic Team had an entire new world, look, and feel for Sonic that would ripple across the franchise in 1998. It was the revolution! So to start the game off, it's a pretty dark introduction. At first, it's quiet, with some of the shots of a modern city with an ever-present looming threat in the soundtrack. An aquatic rumble starts to draw in, until that threat appears, rising from the underground with a massive boom! And then you get the title of the game, which then goes into destruction of the entire city. that feeling crescendos as the game's biggest threat appears. And as the music starts reaching the peak before transitioning into the main theme of Open Your Heart, we finally see Sonic. And as we're getting a glimpse of the other heroes with the dastardly Robotnik, we're already opening our hearts to this new adventure. I'm probably doing this opening a disservice as I analyze it. It's just so damn good at what it's trying to do. Sonic Team was sporting some huge blue spheres for spoiling their game to make a massive impression on the player.
I also love how they make at least a little room for all the main characters to look as cool or dramatic as possible. Even Big the Cat. Just look at this shot, as if he does anything in this game besides fish for a frog and steal a plane. Huh, sounds like a Dr. Seuss story. And after that, the title just bursts onto the screen. Hell yeah! What is it the kids say? This shit goes raw? Yeah, raw. Or hard. It goes hard. Slaps? A raw slap of hardness?
Fun fact, I woke up my parents when I played this for the first time. I just got back from Costco with the DX version, and then after the intro, it blasted me, and my dad all of a sudden had a belt. Thankfully, my experience with Sonic Adventure was uphill from there.
Sonic is the only character available when first starting up the game, and the first time you control him isn't even in a stage, but in a boss fight. People have posited that this is the developers emphasizing how the story and world are the aspects they focused on, rather than the core gameplay.
Oh yeah! This is happening!
I feel like they also wanted to leave a strong impression of Sonic's spunky, in-your-face attitude, while also introducing the main threats being Chaos and Eggman. And the camera. And Cop. They likely also wanted to introduce Sonic's voice, as this was the first mainline game to have full-range voice acting. What better way to show this than with a cutscene confronting the main threat of the game?
Come on, you big drip! Where you going?
You know nothing, fool! It's Chaos, the god of destruction!
Like a lot of launch games for their respective consoles, Sonic Adventure was made to show off the Dreamcast's capabilities, and luckily this is part of a generation that still needed a distinct art style in order to stand out. This game, in a lot of ways, represents an early period of this generation's obsession with beaches and sunny, summery locations. It's kinda weird how the early years of the 6th gen had a lot of this beach, shoreside aesthetic with Final Fantasy X, Flower, Sun, and Rain, Super Mario Sunshine, Wind Waker, Jak and Daxter, Outrun came back with an amazing sequel, and does this count? Even Halo had a goddamn beach! But Sonic Adventure preceded all of these games. What was so alluring about the beaches and oceans around that time? Well, for the Japanese games, one can think about how part of their culture was obsessed with this beach city aesthetic. The city pop subgenre of music was abundant with this, dating back to the 70s. Just look at all these album covers. They almost look like concept pieces for Sonic Adventure. Even some Western-based games were coincidentally messing around with the same aesthetic tone as well. Although in my opinion, none of these aforementioned games embody this aesthetic better than Sonic Adventure.
So, if you want the technical answer, the advancements of 3D technology were basically everyone trying to make water look good because new processing power gave them that ability. Besides the beach and water areas, look at Chaos himself. Do you know why his body is made of water? Because the Dreamcast was able to render good-looking water. Same with Big existing as a playable character, because they wanted players to look at the water for long periods of time, and probably also lure players into checking out the Sega Bass Fishing game, another early Dreamcast title. The early 2000s saw a huge rush of the water race, and just about every studio took notice. You can see this on the GameCube with its codename being Dolphin. Even Insomniac Games, when they made Ratchet & Clank, they ended up developing water physics so advanced the console couldn't run it. Sega developers figured out how to make water look pretty good, so they wanted to make Sonic more about water. Well, without any water levels.
Oh, and here I thought they were all just big Henri fans. Anyway, after the initial boss fight, you get a taste of the adventure field. So, let's talk about all this. Sonic Adventure's structure and game design cover some new ground for the series, while also taking inspiration from the last mainline title, Sonic 3 and Knuckles. There's the different characters you can play as, all with their own abilities to change the gameplay up. It also helps that the initial direction Sega wanted to design this new Sonic game was to make it more like an RPG, which is likely why they focus so much on the adventure aspect. Running around these overworlds, interacting with people that are just walking or talking or stalking, and finding context clues to make progress in the game. Or just giving up and letting the light ball tell you. This was actually really neat, as there's a bunch of little stories you can experience, like the train station employees unionizing, a girl who wants her mom to quit her gambling addiction, etc. Their stories aren't Ibsen, but these citizens and excavators are still fun to talk to throughout your adventures. The amount of dedication they put in to make the open world feel more alive is just so irresistibly charming.
As a child, I wasn't the best at video games. Usually when I played games, I loved to explore worlds and even try to get to places I couldn't. But when it came to boss encounters, I just give the controller to my sister and she'd beat it for me. So it's safe to say that a lot of my playtime in the older Sonic games, whether it be Mega Collection or Adventure, would be standing around and taking the world in as it was. Station Square might just be like 4 rooms to a game designer, but to me, it was a bustling metropolis filled with so many things to do.
Like throwing the burger shop standee.
Yeet.
Where'd he go?
It helps that they made each area distinct so the player wouldn't get so lost easily. Well, in Station Square. I even remember doing glitches in the DX remake where I would go out of bounds, and I got to see how cars would spawn into the game world. That's how much I wanted to explore. I tried boundary breaking in this game to see if there was more. My mind raced with what could be beyond the skybox, like there were secret areas to explore. For my childlike brain at the time, curiosity was key to having those wonders. And while you wouldn't find an entirely new area to explore, it's even more interesting to see the smoke and mirrors they used to create the game world you are in.
I used to be a major detractor when it came to playing as anyone that wasn't Sonic, but some of the other characters really grew on me. Tails is sort of an alternative version of Sonic's stages that take more advantage of his flying ability. Knuckles is where things really change up and you're set to hunt for treasure in large radial venues rather than clearing a linear stage. Amy is a complete flip on Sonic's portions, being a slower, more methodical platformer with puzzles and a nemesis. No, literally, he's Nemesis. Hey, wait a second. Big the Cat stages are really short if you understand how the fishing mechanics work, so I consider his entry pretty inoffensive, and E102 Gamma was this cool early attempt at a shooter-based 3D platformer character. E102 walked so Ratchet could run. And gun. So looking at this colorful cast of characters, I don't know shit about game design, but this all makes me consider the time and budget Sonic Adventure got. It was propped up to be the Dreamcast's flagship game, so it needed to be big and impressive. With that said, being able to play as 6 unique characters was definitely impressive. This helped the game stand out from all the other 3D platformers at the time, which usually only let you play as 1, maybe 2 characters if they were feeling generous. But at the end of the day, none of these other critters and Robot would have unique stages. They all trace back to Sonic, with the exception of Hot Shelter. I can only assume Sonic was the first character to design, while the likes of Big and Gamma were much later entries during production.
Hot Shelter is an original stage for Big, Amy, and Gamma. Each version of the stage uses their gameplay style in unique ways, especially Amy. It felt like that level was specifically designed for her, as Zero constantly chases her through it, giving her no time to rest, even when she's doing puzzles and flipping switches to escape. Of course, my favorite moment is when he bursts from the monitors after appearing in them.
The concept of rearranging stage designs and enemy placements meant these can be reused for entirely different characters with their own scenarios, making the game seem much bigger than it really was, while also expanding on the game's longevity. So it must have saved a ton of time and money to refashion Sonic's stages to be appropriate for the other characters. In a way that kind of lends itself to the narrative, seeing how their stories intertwine with each other constantly.
Having multiple campaigns helps flesh out the game to the perfect length. Anything more than this would make it feel bloated. Some argue in its current state that it is, but if you look at the length of each storyline, you can beat the game in about 5 hours. While a snotty YouTuber would call this padding, I, a much snottier YouTuber, would call this smart reuse of game assets. Sonic visits 10 stages, and those stages are repurposed in the other campaigns, and those areas are explored more within the different gameplay styles. While Sonic would zoom past these areas, Knuckles can search for the Master Emerald pieces and get to see other aspects of the world too. That last section of Speed Highway might not seem like much to Sonic, but to Knuckles, it was a loud, confusing urban city. Same with Big 2. Many of the pools Sonic has no need to visit, Big can just sit down and appreciate the fish in the water.
It was a really smart way to make stage revisits feel less repetitive, especially for the likes of Knuckles and Big. I feel like there was more focus on the story itself, especially since there would finally be voice acting, something even the Saturn was capable of providing, so I'm sure they've considered it since the beginning of this project's development.
Something bugging you? No time for games, Sonic. Give me the emeralds you have, right now! What? Let's just see you take them! Huh.
I'll let SonicKick take over for a bit because he actually has a ton of insight on what went into the voice acting process between actors, casting director, and Sega themselves.
I wouldn't feel a lot is known on our side about the Japanese voice acting for the game, but seeing as how there was likely no sense of a language barrier, I assume the process went swimmingly for them.
それにしてもほんと久しぶりだよね。
まあまあな。それよりどうしたんだ？飛行機落とすなんてテイルズらしくもない。
However, adapting that same script to the Western market introduced a few hiccups and errors. The English voice director of the early 3D Sonic games was Lani Minella, who's also an actress herself, providing her voice to characters such as Ivy from the Soul Calibur series and Lucas in the Smash Bros. Games, along with a ton of other examples. Regardless of her years of experience before Sonic Adventure, Yuji Naka had a majority of the final say during the English localization of the game. This led to arguments between him and Lani, who fought back against many of his decisions. There's various stories of her working with Japanese developers and them not really understanding English inflections, and we'll touch upon a few points of interest when we get to each game. So here are some of the whack-ass requests Naka wanted for Sonic Adventure. Lani told me these herself. You can check out the podcast linked down below. For one, he wanted Sonic to be voiced by Freddie Prinze Jr.
Yo, the biatch was like, what? And I was like, later on.
The only thing I remember Freddy from is when he played a supporting role to a CGI talking dog.
However, the budget was too small for that. He also wanted Knuckles to be voiced with a Jamaican accent.
When you're blood clot, I forgot to set me on a pussy hole.
Yeah, fuck you, fucking reggae idiot bitch!
You want blood clot, cause I don't even bomber clot.
And strangely, he wanted to cast the characters by their physical appearance, rather than their voice and actual acting ability.
That last one is especially wild to me. What, did he want a short track runner to voice Sonic? Maybe throw Dane DeVito in some skinny jeans so he can properly portray Eggman?
To counter this, Lani would put a screen over the window while recording so Naka couldn't see what the actors looked like, which really pissed him off. The actors had long recording sessions in a hot studio, and this led to a lot of frustrations with the younger talent, most especially Tails' voice actor Corey Bringus, who was only around 12 years old at the time of recording.
Sonic, what happened to the Chaos Emerald?
Think about being in his position. You're directed to read out this script inside of a hot studio without any air conditioning for long periods of time. And this is California heat, think about that. While the other actors were probably used to crappier work environments, he was just a kid, and likely didn't have as much patience as the rest. Characters like Big were not taken seriously, because John St. John gave the dumbest voice he could think of from the top of his head.
Oh man, where could that Pollywog pal be anyway?
Thankfully, at the end of the day, Lani was able to get everyone to finish their job at a professional level. However, that didn't stop how ridiculous some of their deliveries are.
Sonic, wake up!
I was on a snooze cruise, I guess.
Good thing you're okay.
While the voice acting sounds overall stilted and weird, I wouldn't exactly call it bad. I think the actors did a fine job portraying their respective characters for the most part, assuming they were given no real direction or even visual references.
Why try to save that which is useless to you? Does not compute.
I feel sorry for you. Eggman failed to give you feelings.
Another strong aspect of sound design would be the music itself. Head composers Jun Sano, Kenichi Tokoi, and Fumi Kumatani provided some fantastic tracks where even this game's detractors can't deny how much they rock. Each song perfectly encapsulates their appropriate stages to the floaty earths of Windy Valley, the hot pursuit of Speed Highway, and the third adjective noun of Final Egg.
Fumi Kumatani is one of my favorite composers of all time who, in my opinion, doesn't get the credit or praise she deserves. A lot of the tracks she composed for Adventure were atmospheric in nature, and that fits her catalog from being a Phantasy Star and Burning Rangers veteran. Kenichi Tokoi and Masaru Setsumaru also made great contributions that aren't talked about much. Missing in the DX version is the track Calm After the Storm by Tokoi, which is the second theme for the egg carrier after it falls into the ocean. One particular use of all three composers coming together is Ice Cap, that tells a story about the stage itself. Snowy Mountain starts off with a smooth acoustic guitar that invites you in. Limestone Cave is inside of the ice cap where you hear the icicles falling as you explore this colorful yet foreboding cave. And then right outside, after starting an avalanche, as Jun Sonoe rocks out with his guitar with Be Cool, Be Wild, and Be Groovy. Because if you don't, you die of frostbite. It's such a finely tuned musical 3-act structure to just one stage. This applies to other aspects of the game, including, believe it or not, the story.
Sonic Adventure's narrative isn't Pulitzer worthy, but it's neat seeing the different perspectives of each character and how their tales intertwine with one another. Except Big, which feels the most forced and lacking. Kinda adds to how late of an entry he likely was. Sonic, unsurprisingly, has the most stages and cutscenes, and the rest of the supporting cast fill the holes in the story that all lead to the ultimate conclusion. The trope in the making for this franchise where Sonic has to become Super Sonic in order to save the world. Like I said, some of this isn't too great, but damn, this must have been a real treat for a lot of Sonic fans back in the late 90s, finally getting a legitimate new installment for the franchise on their brand new console early on. They did a great job crossing 6 separate stories over each other and coming together in the end. You also get a lot of lore regarding the Chaos Emeralds, as well as more about Knuckles and his purpose.
I don't remember being here before, but something about it is familiar.
Everything provided in the story feels like they wanted to flesh out the world of Sonic and returning characters more than ever before.
It's commendable that Sonic Team was this ambitious when it came to the storyline. They especially wanted to make it cinematic in presentation. They accomplished it to the best of their ability, but sometimes the story can falter and be confusing if you put it all together. Like previously mentioned, they are from each perspective of the character, so maybe it is intentional. Take Tails for example. To Sonic, Eggman is some bumbling fool who he will always defeat on a daily basis.
If it isn't Sonic!
Look, it's a giant talking egg.
Silence!
To Tails, he is a threatening presence to the small inventor. so Bristow's voice matches that performance in their respective campaigns.
Well, 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 if it isn't Sonic and Tails.
It's Eggman!
I'm not sure if this was intentional, but to me it felt like Sonic's perception of Eggman's voice was like Long John Baldry's performance in Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog.
I want all of the Chaos Emeralds! Better not interfere! Or else!
You idiot! I would have had that hedgehog if it wasn't for you, whoever you are!
While for Tails, he sounds a lot closer to the inflection Jim Cummings provided for Sonic Sat AM.
You fool. Away, before I make mincemeat out of you.
Yes, but we can't make it too easy.
Was it an homage? I doubt it, but it's still a great direction.
When it comes to the emotional moments of the game, they used Tikal, who's heavily connected to the B-plot of Chaos and the Echidnas.
Father, please don't!
Tikal, the 7 emeralds are essential to our survival. It is for the good of all our people.
How can I make you understand? Attacking other countries, stealing and killing can't be the right path to peace.
Using her as a presence in the game helps the player feel connected to the world. You get to learn more about her in the flashback segments dropped through each character story, which she shows you the past. The Mystic Rooms are so... mystic because of the past deeds of the Echidnas. They were consumed by a lust for power in abusing the Chaos Emeralds. They were the home to not only Chaos, but the Chao creatures it took care of. It was also where Tikal went to live a life of peace with them. Looking at all these past events, Pakakamak, Tikal's father, was willing to kill his own daughter for pure power.
Get out of my way!
No way!
Did you hear what I said?
I won't obey!
We need those 7 emeralds to give us total power! It's power for the people! And they are your people too, you know! We must get that emerald!
Greed is our enemy. Once it starts, you will always want more. Please don't do this. I beg you.
Bah! I don't listen to the words of a child. Ready, men? Charge!
Father!
Oh, it's a monster!
Does he feel remorse for his actions? We may never know, but that decision ended the Echidna clan. Except Knuckles, I guess. However, some of the flashbacks were unnecessary. Like, what was the point of Big going back into the past just to hear the Master Emerald's prayer? What good does that do him?
Shot in the dark, I presume it was to give each story the sense of consistency, and perhaps even destiny for this world-changing event to occur.
While there's a bit of an edge to the story, Sonic Adventure maintains the overall tone that you got from the Genesis games, just on a grander scale. More Sonic 3 and Knuckles storytelling than Sonic 1 and 2. And I guess more natural disasters.
With that said, Sonic Adventure probably had the best balance of simplicity and complexity. The overall story was clear and concise enough for even kids, their target audience, to understand, but has its layers of nuance here and there. The arc Tails goes through to overcome his fears, Knuckles' struggle to find balance and purpose, and E102 Gamma's story having a pretty emotional core that only started receiving praise recently in the gaming sphere. So that's our thoughts on the story itself, but the gameplay? Pretty good, all things considered. It has its peaks and valleys, but man, when it peaks, it peaks! Sonic was always portrayed as this cute tyke with a real attitude, but Sonic's grown up a bit, and naturally some of his audience has too, so kids that played the original Sonic back in 1991 or so get to see him a little older, a little wiser, and a little cooler. And that in itself must have been really fun. That's probably why they gave him the most bombastic sequences throughout the stages that are also fun to play. They also kept things pretty loose when it came to controlling him. Not sure how much of that accounts for particular exploits and such. I wouldn't even call Sonic Adventure buggy, but it does tend to feel a little lax around the joints at times. Most especially with Sonic, where mashing a spin dash makes it so easy to go from 0 to cheetah blood covered Ferrari in single-digit frames, regardless of where you are.
Sonic controls very fluidly. His movements and momentum act in accordance to the game world, and the hub areas kinda give you the freedom to get used to his playstyle. The camera, however, can be a bit annoying, especially as an early 3D game, and that could be due to this being such new grounds for the likes of Sonic Team. But hey, at least Mr. Know-It-All tried to warn ya. While I think Sonic Team wanted massive open valleys for the player to discover and go through, a major issue probably does come down to the camera. That's why so many levels have a straightforward path, and you will see this be evolved upon. But the loosey-goosiness of Sonic Adventure kinda gives it its charm. Of course, it's not like people back in 1999 were actively speedrunning and looking for exploits, so a lot of the glitch compilations you see with this game didn't really happen on a regular playthrough. If you want to talk about glitches, that's where DX comes into play. The 2003 remake of Sonic Adventure, which updated the models, gave the game a glossier look, and changed a good amount of textures while also messing up tons of internal aspects, causing the game to perform overall worse. This is the most commonly distributed version of Sonic Adventure that mostly everyone remembers the game looking like, while the Dreamcast version was way more consistent in texture work, models, playability, and everything else. What made DX this way, other than the textures, is the switch from 30 frames per second to 60, and this caused a lot of collision detection issues. This is where most of the crazy glitches that Sonic Adventure is known for came from, and led to some chucklefuck clickbaiters abusing them in 2016 to help lower the already low reputation of Sonic for literal years.
Enough about that though. The ambition to make the game in this way makes me consider where Sonic was at the time. I can't help but theorize that going from Sonic 3 and Knuckles to Sonic Adventure was a sensible next step. One of Takashi Iizuka's first jobs at Sega was designer for Sonic 3, and he would become the director for Sonic Adventure. Looking back at the Genesis titles, Sonic 1 had a lot of methodical, careful platforming beyond a Green Hill Zone. Sonic 2 added more speed to the overall formula, and many would call it the defining title for the franchise. Sonic 3, I think, added a lot more dynamic, albeit scripted and streamlined, stimulating paths, making the game look more actiony and dramatic, if that makes sense. Not only that, but it had a narrative thread pulling you along. You know, with Knuckles antagonizing Sonic, working with Eggman until he betrays him. You see how Sonic gets from place to place, making this feel more like one entire world rather than a series of set pieces. Even that little bit of lore in the Hidden Palace, there's a lot here for a few critters with no speaking lines. So having this multifaceted story seems like a natural next step. And just seeing how much Sonic 3 loved putting you through these loop-de-loops and crazy fast swirls and such, it makes sense that a lot of the stages in Sonic Adventure, especially for the titular character, would be full of scenarios for the sake of spectacle. Best example is the third act of Ice Cap. Why do they include the snowboarding segment with a giant avalanche and stealth bombers, despite that Sonic literally can't get hurt in this scenario? Because it's awesome.
Okay!
But that's all Sonic. As for the rest of the characters, Tails is alright. Hard to really get a lot out of it, considering all of his stages are just sliced up bits from Sonic with some added railways in the form of these aerial hoops. Overall, it felt like their intent was to make Sonic's partner feel a lot more confident, have more pride in himself, so he can feel like less of a sidekick and more of a hero himself.
I've changed a lot since I've started hanging with Sonic, but I can't depend on him forever. I know I can do this by myself. Okay, Eggman, bring it on!
Instead of a linear path, Knuckles' stages are designed radially. Radially? You search large areas trying to find these emerald pieces that make the sensor go off. Amy doesn't go fast, but instead emphasizes on platforming and problem solving. Her hammer weapon is her way to fight and ward off enemies, most especially Zero, who won't stop chasing her. Big the Cat's fishing is fine, but very simple. Maybe a bit unintuitive. Feels like a watered down version of the actual fishing game Sega made.
Something's biting!
E102 rocks. I get some good dopamine wheeling around and blasting enemies into combos. Seeing as how he's also not fast, you gain time to clear the stage through said shooting combos. It's a really fun mechanic.
The multiple playstyles serve their purpose, making the game feel diverse. So many people act like the other campaigns are long, but in reality, the main trio has the longest of the 6. Tails' stages are similar to Sonic, but the racing in them adds to Tails' passion to keep up with him. It's reflected in his story that he wants to be a hero of his own, and while he may not be the quickest on his feet, his flight gives him a massive advantage over the blue blur. In translating Knuckles to 3D, it was smart to give him environments to explore for emerald pieces because that's mostly what you were doing in the classics in a way. His gliding and climbing gave more incentives to explore each level for extra goodies. This time, they made that the focus, and you see he has some of the same stages as Sonic from different perspectives. Also, they had a really brilliant idea to keep those stages rather compact so players can easily navigate and search the area. There's a consequence for having big areas, which they thankfully avoided this time. Amy, Big, and Gamma have less stages and are much quicker to get through when you become familiar with the game. Hell, Amy only has 3 stages, with Hot's Shelter exploring everything they could with crafting a search and chase experience in that gameplay style. Gamma stages are time attacks where you're encouraged to rack up big combos, then reach the boss at the end to eliminate them. Gamma's stages are the most directive-based style because he's a machine on a mission, destroy the target. Big, on the other hand, is more loose because he's trying to catch Froggy, but he can also catch dinner in the process too. His stages don't even have timers. Extra objectives task him to catch a certain size of fish before getting Froggy. Again, the campaigns are tailor-made to each character and designed to fit their personality and playstyle. Nothing's wrong with a character in a Sonic game wanting to take the time to go fishing, especially if they aren't Sonic. He even learned to do that recently.
Let's not boost to later games yet. Looking at all of this now and reflecting on Sonic Adventure more than 2 decades later, I can't really say much besides this game was cool. Perhaps even way past cool. It's pretty fun to play, has an engaging enough story even with its rickety cutscenes. This was a huge step for the Sonic franchise and I adored the atmosphere throughout, coated with exquisite music. For real, you want to talk rough transition into 3D? Talk about the miserable process Sega put their American division through trying to force Sonic X-treme into fruition just to get it cancelled. Not this ambitious, stylish adventure game that happens to be a little squeaky around the edges. But I can't even pretend I wasn't part of this dumb bandwagon. I got a GameCube fairly close to when it launched, but didn't own a Dreamcast until years later. I got Sonic Adventure 2 Battle as one of my first games for the system, and we'll talk about that in a bit. I was aware of Sonic Adventure 1 and my sweet little memories playing it at my old friend's house that day, but again, I didn't have a Dreamcast, and we actually moved at that point, so I didn't live close to anybody that had one. So when Sonic Adventure DX was announced, I was so excited to play the game myself from beginning to end on my GameCube. And it's being remade from the ground up? The GameCube is a newer console with more powerful hardware. There's no way this won't be the definitive experience, my 12-year-old brain thought. So basically what happened was, I played Sonic Adventure DX, this remake of Sonic Adventure, and it was awful. I didn't hate it as a kid or anything, because I didn't really have the capacity for that, but I do recall noticing how it didn't feel nearly as smooth or precise as its sequel on GameCube, and if I wanted a 3D Sonic fix, I just played Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. The glitches, bugs, and visual atrocities of DX stayed within my head, and honestly, that became a stand-in for my memories of Sonic Adventure for a good long time. It doesn't help that this became Sega's standard when it came to porting Sonic Adventure to Xbox 360, PS3, and Steam. It led me to believe the original Dreamcast game was just as shitty. I carried that stupid assumption with me for years until I decided to replay the original game myself and, well, we just went over it. I adore Sonic Adventure 1 and what it represents. It's not incredible or anything, but I recognize how revolutionary it felt for the series back then, and I love the aesthetics in its entire world. Something that would be forever lost after this original adventure.
My experience with Sonic Adventure was a little different. As a kid, I grew up with the PlayStation until my parents got me a GameCube. I really wanted one because when I was at Best Buy, I played Sonic Adventure DX on the demo disc. I remember Emerald Coast, being entranced by the colors, the sense of speed, and the cheerful, rocking music. From there, I just knew I wanted that game. I remember my parents buying DX from Costco, and it came in one of those security case things, and after finding some hard scissors to open it, from there, I just fell in love with it. I didn't know what a Dreamcast was, or that this was a port. I just remember being able to explore Station Square, walk around in 3D, and imagine what's behind the places I couldn't access yet. That was enough for me. I spent so much time in Sonic Adventure's world, I would just pop it in to play and relax. To me, Sonic Adventure was an open world game.
Wrapping things up for this subject, I was a Sonic poser. While I knew a lot about the franchise, perhaps more than the average fan, this blemish in my soul stayed within me, until today, where I'm coming at you here as someone that properly replayed Sonic Adventure on a Dreamcast, and then played again on Steam while using the better SADX mod for footage. I think I understand Sonic Adventure much better than I ever have before. I hope this is enough to satiate the Sonic fans that were mad at me for talking shit about Sonic Adventure exactly the same way every other poser shitheel on YouTube already did back in 2017. So yeah, Sonic Adventure kicks ass. Would the sequel manage to deliver more of its exquisite charm? Not at all. But it's still pretty good.
Contra los villanos Dr. Eggman, Rush y el misterioso erizo negro Shadow. ¿Qué más faltó al aceptar el reto?
Sonic Adventure 1 did about as well as one should probably expect for a launch title / early release for a new console. So naturally, a follow-up was in order. However, Sega and Sonic Team went about its development differently in nearly all aspects. The summertime aesthetic is certainly still present, but it's not really that cozy anymore. It feels more threatening and wild. There's also more emphasis on the concrete jungles of California and militarized areas, rather than its breezy shores. Oh, and Egypt. The characters are in Egypt for a little bit.
So, after the development of Sonic Adventure 1 finished in Japan, Sonic Team split, and while a part of them stayed in Japan, the other half moved to San Francisco, California. While those in Japan got to work on other projects like Phantasy Star Online, the new Sonic Team USA localized Sonic Adventure 1 and later began pre-production on the sequel. Sonic Adventure 2 was meant to be more American-focused, as they took a lot of inspiration from San Francisco for the design of the game, with many San Fran landmarks making appearances like the tram, the Golden Gate Bridge,
the moon,
and routes for kart racing. One can't forget City Escape, where Sonic or someone else are just barreling through parked cars because I bet you the devs despise traffic and parking situations in such a cramped city! For this follow-up, you can tell that Sonic Team had a more focused vision toward action, and that certainly shows in the final product.
Sonic Adventure 2 might be considered the more popular game of this duology since it was ported to the Nintendo GameCube shortly after being released on the Dreamcast, thus finding an even bigger audience. This was also the first Sonic game I ever properly owned. I distinctly remember EB Games having a buy one get one free promotion for anyone that was purchasing a GameCube in that same transaction, so it was the only game that caught my attention to accompany the copy of Super Smash Bros. Melee that I begged my mom to get. Honestly, this was probably the experience a lot of kids had when adopting a Nintendo GameCube early on and popping it in after playing Melee for hours on end. I guess I was just too dumb for Pikmin when I was 11. Also, something strange about the original game, it was released after the Dreamcast already died. The console was discontinued in March 2001, but Sonic Adventure 2 released about 2 months after that. So not only was it a game celebrating the 10th anniversary of Sonic, but also a swan song to the Dreamcast itself. Damn, that must have been a sad party. This was Sega's final home console before becoming a third-party developer, something they embraced pretty quickly after the fact as they created a launch title on GameCube later that year, and also supported Xbox pretty strongly with some early exclusives. So, Sonic Adventure 2 has a different take on the word adventure, as the open world was completely removed. The globe-trotting vibe was more present in the visuals of the stages, using real locations and landmarks for its venues. I guess its adventure aspect isn't entirely lost. The gameplay variety was also cut in half, sporting 2 separate campaigns with 3 characters that have their own opposing equal. The surviving characters, mechanically speaking, are Sonic, Knuckles, and E102 Gamma. The way they achieved this is by adding 2 new characters, Shadow the Hedgehog and Rouge the Bat, in order to even out the villainous side. Shadow was created in order for Sonic to have a proper rival. I guess they didn't think Metal Sonic was cool enough. The bastards.
Shadow, I'm the world's ultimate life form. There's no time for games. Farewell!
While he can be considered an edgier version of Sonic, I think they wanted his personality to be a stark contrast to the blue blur.
For the people of this planet, I promise you, revenge!
He doesn't crack jokes, he never expresses any real joy in what he does, and of course his entire character is the centerpiece of the melodramatic story about his creator, Gerald Robotnik, and caretaker, Maria. But we'll get into the story later. There's also Rouge the Bat, who has a bit more of her own agenda, not having any real ties with any of the characters.
I despise anyone who takes jewels from me. All the world's gems are mine to keep.
Yeah, we'll see about that, Batgirl.
Donning the profession of a world-class jewel thief obviously meant to compliment Knuckles and his hunt for the Master Emerald pieces once again.
Shadow is cool, and serves as a great rival to Sonic, as well as Rouge to Knuckles, who was also working for Gun, the military force of the game, as a secret agent. Of course, she had no idea what she would discover the more she looked into Project Shadow, and Eggman was like, "Hey, super secret weapon by my granddad? Let's go!" Jesus.
Unfortunately, all 3 of these gameplay styles sort of flub up their previous iterations in one or more ways. Sonic and Shadow are still fast, for sure, but feel a lot more stilted with their movement. Something about the way they move is more rigid, and they don't let you mash spin dash anymore, mapping the same button to a roll attack if you do mash it. Tails and Eggman, being the new E102, move like molasses. It feels like you're punished just for turning, and aiming is sticky. Not sure if that's the best way to describe it, but there's times where it just won't cooperate when trying to get a bead on an enemy. Not really a fan of them or their stages. Knuckles and Rouge certainly play fine, but most of their stages are obnoxiously huge. That's probably why there's clues everywhere hinting at their target locations. They knew they made this shit obtuse. Doesn't help matters that now you can only detect a single piece at a time. Why did they change that?
Multiplayer.
Oh. Still, it all flows better once you get used to it. The original Sonic Adventure was more ramshackle with its design, so the loose feeling of playing as most of the characters is understandable. However, the devs involved are now more familiar with designing a game like Sonic in 3D, so this sequel clearly had more refinement put into the different gameplay perspectives. Thus, the rigidness kind of makes sense. Except the mech suits. They just don't feel good to play. We've also still got plenty of camera problems throughout. Playing as Sonic and Shadow was pretty satisfying. Reacting and memorizing the stages was fun, and going for the A rank solidified a sense of accomplishment. Knuckles and Rouge, they're okay, not terrible. I just think the level design is cumbersome, especially with how huge they tend to be. Even with the abundance of clues, it can still be really frustrating when you're trying to find the emerald pieces. No joke, I recall playing the game when it was new, reaching the Death Chamber stage with Knuckles and giving up after days of trying to beat it. My 11-year-old self was so badly stumped by the stage, I gave up completely and dropped the game. I'm not sure when I picked it back up, but it was at least months after that happened. As an adult, they're not as bad depending on where the emerald pieces spawn, but can still be really frustrating. Of course, another new feature was a dedicated multiplayer mode, where you get to go one-on-one with a friend in either a race, some treasure hunting, or a clunky mech shooting battle. It can be fun with a friend, but is severely unbalanced in various ways. God damn it. That's part of respawn. Fuck. The story in Sonic Adventure 2 is also a bit strange, to say the least, because it's got a noticeably more dramatic tone than the previous game and seems to take itself more seriously. Shadow's tragic background, his connection with Maria, Sonic being racially profiled by the fucking feds.
There always seems to be a lot of police around when you don't need them.
Eggman committing global terrorism while later finding out his grandfather was found guilty of world treason, sentenced to death by firing squad. Sure, we saw some heavy stuff in Sonic Adventure, but most of the game's story was considerably lighthearted. Of course, the darkest is yet to come if we're talking narrative in a 3D Sonic game.
When it comes to Sonic Adventure 2, I feel that it was a straight line from Adventure 1 story-wise. They wanted the game to be even more dramatic and grandiose. While the first Sonic Adventure had the story of what was essentially a Sonic RPG by Akinori Nishiyama, Sonic Adventure 2 goes for a somewhat more emotional plotline for the sequel because that's what made it cool. And while they did veer too far in some cases, I still think that this kind of storytelling works for Sonic. You'll see that other franchises followed suit, with better writers of course, so for Sonic it doesn't surprise me at all. Sonic as a character strives to be way past cool, so what's cooler than sticking out from the platforming gaming crowd to tell a dramatic story about corrupt government organizations, global terrorism, and your favorite mascots going into space to fight a giant friggin' lizard that's about to blow up the planet? Even when the writing quality isn't the best, the concepts and emotional beats are there to make it memorable, and they deliver on its payoff.
Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 share some narrative bits. Granted, it starts with Sonic already in hot water. Breaking out of custody immediately leaves you wondering why he would be put under arrest in the first place. Even so, things are a pretty small scale at first, where Sonic is just eliminating his immediate threat in the city area, and there's early points of intrigue like his main adversary showing up and leaving this aura of mystery. Also, like the first game, the story slowly unfolds, raising the stakes at a more global scale, and all playable characters are led to saving the world from a giant monster. The biggest difference between these games would have to be Sonic's matching rival, Shadow the Hedgehog.
An early hint on the story and Shadow's involvement as a character is his relationship with Gun. You learn more about their involvement while playing the dark side. There's also this line.
Now I know what's going on. The military has mistaken me for the likes of you.
I've seen people claim that this is a plot hole when they can't tell the difference between their appearances, but think of it this way. Gun has kept this project locked for 50 years, and they don't want to take responsibility for how they treated jailed Robotnik and the things they made him do. It's why they kidnapped Sonic, since he was similar in appearance and can easily use him as a scapegoat for their crimes. I felt this was implied in the game, and it's worth noting that this was emphasized more in the Sonic X anime. This is just one of numerous examples of the story having some nuance and more thought put into it than a lot of people gave it credit for, then and now.
I can definitely concur that the story itself is unique to any other platforming mascot game around this time, and that definitely helped Sonic stand out in the early 2000s. Is it a little silly how these 3-foot-tall critters are taking the story this seriously? Sure, but I can still get into it and become invested in their scenarios. Cutscene direction in general was a lot better this time around too, now that all the characters are animated more smoothly. They use mocap technology this time around, so they have a lot more quirks shining through with how they move.
A man did that.
When it comes to the English side of voice recording, however, things didn't get much better for 2's localization. Issue here was the timing and animations were only properly done for the Japanese dialogue, and the English ADR dialogue would either have awkward pauses or be too long and get cut off by the next line.
What's up with that knucklehead anyway? Trying to take over the shuttle? I thought we were toast for sure. Huh? Where did he go now?
Looks like he bailed.
This place looks deserted, dusty too.
When it was operational, it was the most advanced research center of its kind. But looking at it now...
Now it's an abandoned ark, wouldn't you say?
Its defense shields are super strong, so we have to find a way to destroy it from
Isn't
inside.
that a Chaos Emerald?
One interesting tidbit about Rouge. You know the weird noises she makes when she's climbing or pulling herself up on a platform? All Sega of Japan. Lonnie was being directed the way the Japanese developers wanted, and requested that instead she would have sounds of her struggling to pull herself up. The Sega of Japan people involved just wanted, and so that's the origin of it.
I guess that explains some of Eggman's in-game lines as well. But for what it's worth, the narrative execution is overall better. The cutscenes just have a lot more polish to them. While there are still 6 different perspectives being presented and even a flashback B-plot once again, they are fashioned into just 2 linear story modes, and the tone is more consistent. I also like that the hero side feels more upbeat, rambunctious, and fun with its story delivery, while Dark Side feels more dramatic and serious in tone. The 2 stories only feel parallel with each other near the end as they merge, naturally.
Unfortunately, that polish didn't transition as well to the ports of Sonic Adventure 2 that most people played. Battle and the HD ports have some audio mixing issues because the Dreamcast would actually auto-balance loud sounds in its chip, but any other console would take that data and play it at full blast. That's why you'll hear loud noises or music over dialogue in later versions of Sonic Adventure 2 during cutscenes.
So that's Dr. Eggman.
Well, I guess I can use it for something. I'll just take it with me. Farewell, knucklehead.
I can go on making fun of the story's melodrama and weird sense of direction, but in the end, I can't deny that it's all still pretty enjoyable as part of the entire package. It especially has a great conclusion with Shadow's motivation and his final efforts to work with everyone else to save the world. Hearing the full rendition of Live and Learn with its lyrics during the final boss only hits so hard because of how much the story grips you. I also have to give props to the overall stage variety. All of the stages feel a lot more distinct from one another, even those that share the same environment. The amount of details and diverse settings are definitely above what the original Sonic Adventure provided. I'd consider this a trade-off from the open world-ish aspect from the first game that they didn't need to concern themselves with, thus being able to put more resources into the action stages.
This was my biggest caveat with Sonic Adventure 2. While I understand why they went more action stage oriented, I feel that I'm hopping from stage to stage like in the classic games rather than exploring one large world. I agree with the stage variety and it makes most of them stand out, but sometimes the assets used for different playstyles annoy me to a degree. Like, I love Radical Highway as Shadow because it's a night chase against Gun while you steal a Chaos Emerald. But then you got Mission Street with Tails. It's the same concept, but your movement options are terrible, and you have that noise going off every second with some music that, in my opinion, doesn't fit the stage at all. I find Eggman's stages more enjoyable overall, if I'm being honest.
Upon replay, I came to the same conclusion about this, and I think I know why. Most of Tails' stages are built to be very narrow. It's almost suffocating at times when you're playing as this hunk of shit. Meanwhile, Eggman's stages give his hunk of shit a lot more room to breathe, and way more opportunities to perform big shooting combos. They even gave Eggman a stage with low gravity, giving him even more movement options by being able to hover upwards, even if it's just for one stage. It's almost as if the designers took their appearance into account, seeing how Tails' mech is tall and slim, while Eggman's is more stout and round. Maybe Shadow stages have more upward momentum than Sonic's, as meant to complement their quills or something.
I also prefer a majority of Rouge's stages over Knuckles, but not all of them because she ends on mad space. Shit's fucking garbage, bro. At least for Sonic and Shadow, they mix up their stages really well. They feel very juxtaposed between each other most of the time, which goes well with their dynamic.
The Chao Garden, while present in both adventure titles, is something a lot of fans laud regarding Sonic Adventure 2. While I don't have too much to say, it is a pretty compelling part of the game, designed with the Dreamcast's VMU in mind, the console's incredible memory card / handheld system that you never put batteries in. The Chao Garden and its interactivity with the Dreamcast VMU really shows how forward-thinking Sega was with their hardware. There were actually a lot of cool little games you can play and such with the VMU between both games and their respective Chao Garden. And in turn, the GameCube port showed off the capabilities of the Game Boy Advance and its connectivity features. So if you had a Game Boy Advance, a copy of Sonic Advance, the first original Sonic game for the Game Boy Advance that was released around the same time, and the GBA to GameCube link cable, you got to transfer and take care of your Chao between games. A tiny Chao Garden on the go. Of course, in the later ports, these features don't exist, so this aspect is a bit stripped down. Either way, training Chao to win in races and kick the crap out of other Chao babies can still be a lot of fun. There's ways to access some of the abandoned features in the PC port of Sonic Adventure 2, but at that point, I'd advise checking out Cybershell's video discussing the Chao Garden, as he goes into great detail already. Side note, it feels most appropriate to actually bring up and complement the Chao Garden aspect in Sonic Adventure 2, since most people that champion the first game never really bring up the Chao Garden due to how undercooked it feels, and most people that champion the second game or even dislike it never forget to praise it because of how captivating it was and how gratifying it felt taking care of these squishy babies.
The Chao Garden was heavily expanded for Sonic Adventure 2. While the first game's gardens were based off the adventure status, in 2 they're based off the Chao themselves. And they added the use of Chaos Drives as well with the small animals you find trapped in Eggman's robots. These items would level up your Chao's stats, while the animals can change up their appearances as well. The Chaos Drives also add a bit of lore to the story. These tubes of concentrated energy were actually created by Gerald Robotnik, Eggman's grandfather. They can be found inside the robots controlled by GUN, the global military organization. This shows not only how advanced Gerald was as an inventor, but also how the government bodies have been using his research for the Chaos Emeralds to power their machines. It kind of emphasizes how much he was taken advantage of, seeing how they're still using his tech after 50 years. It was this potent energy source they kept to themselves. Even his grandson, Eggman, didn't have access to them, resorting to enslaving live animals as the power source for his robots. But I'm rambling. The Chao Garden is so aesthetically pleasing to me. Rather than blasting you with that overly happy music like in Sonic Adventure 1, this Chao Garden remixes that theme to be calmer and help you relax. Chao Race was much easier to comprehend as well, achieved by giving your Chao a stamina bar, rather than mash A to cheer dumbass. And I can't get over the silly sounds and animations in Chao Karate. It is the cutest cockfight you'll ever see. Don't worry, they don't have bones and can survive being thrown at walls. They'll be fine. This is one of the cases where they actually trimmed the fat of the original Chao Garden and made vast improvements to how it operated, which made it more memorable and the definitive Chao Garden that hasn't been replicated since. The last time they attempted something like this was Knight's Journey of Dreams. That shit sucked.
The music's good. Do you need me to compliment it to high heaven like everyone else? It's good, even great at times. I'll never forget some of these tracks. I'm already struggling to justify this video in the first place. But one thing about the soundtrack compared to the first game is that it doesn't feel as diverse or have a lot of unique songs. Not to me, at least. This could come from the fact that the gameplay is much more streamlined this time. Compared to Sonic Adventure 1's design, they made a lot more room for action in the sequel, and I think the soundtrack naturally reflects that.
To build off what Genry's saying, it is too much of a specific direction. While I feel Adventure 1 has an extremely diverse soundtrack, even though it's mostly Sinnoh, Adventure 2 feels even less diverse because he did nearly all the tracks for characters this time as well. To me, the soundtrack only felt different for the treasure hunting stages. New to the composing team is Tomoya Otani, and you'll see his name a lot going forward for this franchise. but his compositions were a nice addition to Knuckles' stages that a rapper named Hunted P, who blessed the tracks with trashy lyrics he himself admitted he concocted within an afternoon.
To space and left my homes. At least we were friends, and I'm not all alone. Bad thing was that the emerald spell.
Kumatani returns, composing for Rouge's stages with the sweet vocals of Tabitha Fair, who didn't waste her time in her career and went on to perform with artists such as Lady Gaga and Celine Dion.
But other than that, I feel Adventure 2's soundtrack isn't as unique as the first.
Especially with the lack of variety in composition. I feel that has to do with composers being assigned certain characters rather than the overall atmosphere and mood of the game.
On my most cynical days, I'm willing to claim people find the soundtrack for Sonic Adventure 2 to be more memorable due to how many more in-game songs have lyrics. Still, I don't want to make it sound like I'm disparaging the soundtrack. It's no mystery why it's so iconic, especially among fans. I can sing along City Escape as well as most people, probably live and learn as well, and I love nearly all the instrumentals featured throughout. Sonic Adventure 2 has such a different vibe from any Sonic game before it, which further exemplifies how talented the music teams within Sega really were at the time. I also really like how Final Rush and Cosmic Wall have the same melody, accentuating that they're in the same environment.
I love the lyrical tracks too. Matter of fact, when it came to Sonic Adventure 2, those were the tracks for the game I had on my iPod that I totally got from a legal service.
Well, I don't show off, don't criticize. I'm just living by my own feelings, and I won't give in, won't compromise. Avoid the arc, a genius at heart, wanting to unlock the mysteries of life. I am the Eggman, that's what I am. I am the Eggman, I got the master plan. I am the when you can't help but follow, and put you right back where you came. Live and learn.
I guess it's worth mentioning too, all this footage you see here is the Steam port from 2012, and there is a debate on what it is people consider the definitive way to play this game. It's not as cut and dry as Sonic Adventure's remake, botching the art style and gameplay of its original title. The differences are harder to notice for some, but there's certainly a lot of key changes and even flubs throughout. Through the Steam port came a community of modders that try to fix these various issues with a loading program that's super easy to set up. Unfortunately, I had issues trying to apply these fixes, and while I did notice some good gameplay tweaks, a mod messed the game up so bad I literally couldn't complete certain stages. And even then, there were changes I did not like. In the end, the only mod I used to capture footage was one that removed subtitles from the cutscenes. If you own Sonic Adventure 2 on Steam, go ahead and try out SA2 Mod Loader for yourself. You'll probably find tweaks to appreciate. Looking over Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 again made me realize how staunchly different the two games are, despite only being a couple years apart in release. And despite Sonic Adventure 2 being the first Sonic game I really dove into myself, it's Sonic Adventure 1 that really speaks to me these days. Even so, both games have their stronger points, and they both represent different aspects of 3D Sonic action that were completely lost in all of the titles released after this Dreamcast duology. Perhaps an aspect that the Sega we used to know making these games truly died with their final console.
For many years, especially when I was first getting into Sonic, I've seen so many people claim Sonic Adventure 2 was the best game in the entire franchise. I remember reading statements like that online back before I even started playing these games. And it is great! It is the game that introduced Shadow the Hedgehog, it had fun action stages, an interesting story, and multiple playstyles for characters. When I finally played it for myself, I still liked it, but I just couldn't share the same sentiments. I feel like this came from wanting to follow what other people said instead of my own thoughts. But while I still like Sonic Adventure 2, the first game remains my favorite game in the series for the heart, atmosphere, exploration, and just overall fun. Sonic Adventure 2, on the other hand, I can go in and play a few stages, but then I'll get allergic to it after an hour for the faults I notice while playing. In the attempt to try to make the sequel more action-oriented, they lost the adventure feeling of the game, at least in my opinion. I think the best way to describe both games is like going to an amusement park. Sonic Adventure 1 would be like exploring the park at your own pace, going to meet and greets, seeing shows, playing carnival games, riding rides, and spending time making memories with the people you're with. Whereas Sonic Adventure 2 would be like going to said amusement park and only hitting the big thrills. Gotta ride Expedition Everett's like 10 times today. But you know what comes with just riding the roller coasters? Waiting in line, headaches, motion sickness, and not everyone in your party being able to enjoy the place equally. Which do you prefer?
Depends on the day for me, personally. I think that's a divisive perspective on theme parks and attractions of that nature, and sometimes it can be one or the other for me. I think a good way to put it is that Sonic Adventure 2 never knows when to relax. It's always just go, go, go! Like, think about Casinopolis in the first game. All the cute little things you could do in the lobby, like bumping into the machines for extra rings, poking the giant cowgirl, taking a shower for some reason, and of course the 2 pinball tables. All this under what many would consider the actual stage. Do you think Casinopolis as a whole would meld with Sonic Adventure 2? Hell no. That's not to say the relaxing nature is completely non-existent, it's just exclusive to the Chao Garden, which for all intents and purposes is optional. So when you do want to take that second to chill out, you can. It certainly doesn't replace the adventure fields though. I'd probably be more forgiving if certain aspects were designed better, but that's not to say it's all bad. Certainly not. As expected, the action stages have a lot more going on for the player, hence the ranking system and every single stage having 5 different objectives to complete. All of it is much more diverse and interesting than what Sonic Adventure offered with its stage replays. I especially like the alternate hard mode stages for Sonic and Shadow. Everything is designed a lot more efficiently too, even the menus. I find that to be pretty important in an action game with an assortment of stages, and like I said before, cutscene direction was a lot better. With that, the story still has a lot of awkward charm that make it even more enjoyable to witness. Sonic Adventure 2 overall is still a good game. It's full of action-packed thrill rides, caked with awesome music, exciting scenarios, and the multiplayer mode can be a competitive bit of fun too. The melodramatic narrative can put people off, but not me. I think it's great, even if I am just laughing at how ridiculous it can be sometimes. Sonic Adventure 1 stands as this really neat and interesting game, which became an early or late punching bag for YouTube shitheels such as myself. I can't help but think some of that blame is towards Sega for providing such an awful, ugly, glitchy remake on the GameCube, which subsequently became the standard as this version would be ported to modern platforms to this day, if it's available to begin with. I like to think that's why they've held off from using that same port for a potential version on newer platforms, such as the PlayStation 5 or Nintendo Switch. Perhaps Sega wants to make sure they get it right next time they reintroduce 2 of Sonic's biggest games to newer generations. The original Sonic Adventure, to me, represents the Dreamcast itself best, a console I only grew to love after it had already died. It has this imaginative Y2K vibe that was on all the platforms, but especially encapsulated with the Dreamcast. I even think this vibe is depicted in its own commercials, like all the games shared this world and every bit of its low-poly beauty, and that vibe is slathered across Sonic Adventure. It's so cozy and mesmerizing.
Man, stay off the light speed!
My bad.
There are people online that make this game, its design, its visual appeal, its legacy, their entire online personality. And you know what? I don't blame them at all for it. It's weird to me how the sequel doesn't really have this cozy feeling at all, despite being made so shortly after, and the team itself wasn't too different. Perhaps they knew Sonic Adventure 2 was going to see potential life outside of Dreamcast, and that somehow changed their attitude to how this game should look and feel. Or maybe the LA air just poisoned their brains. Either way, this beautiful, polygonal, Y2K aesthetic is all I'm here for. and it's actually starting to make a comeback for modern games. I don't know, you've probably heard me aimlessly gush about this Dreamcast vibe enough. I'm sure some YouTuber that's way more popular than me has perfectly dissected and described what made the Dreamcast vibe so special. And their name probably isn't even fucking Dreamcast guy. But as much as I love Sonic Adventure in my adult life, I know it isn't something they'll ever really replicate. It was 1000% a product of its time, and I don't care for the posterity of them recapturing that magic or just remaking it in Unreal Engine or some shit. Lord knows that would probably be disastrous. Sonic Adventure 1 was clearly being made with the devs in a constant state of will this even work mentality, and I think that lack of self-assuredness added to how unique it ended up being.
Absolutely. Again, I feel a remake of this game wouldn't work because it's a product of its time. They attacked the project with an all-hands-on-deck approach as they were prepared to reboot the franchise. A spiritual successor or similar project can and has been shown to work and not work, but this was a game that captured the heart of many fans and game likers such as myself that I still play to this day.
With that said, maybe it's good that Sonic Adventure 2 felt so different. That makes the first game so much more unique to me. The sequel is good, and certainly deserves to stand proudly next to it as a fine 3D Sonic title, but it just doesn't give me any real warm fuzzy feelings, despite being the first title in the franchise I owned myself. I legitimately think it doesn't have as much for me to grasp at, as this was the beginning of Sonic becoming a lot more streamlined. I think I just have more appreciation for games that are approached more haphazardly. Despite all that, Sonic Adventure 2 is still a great game in its own right, with memorable moments, an endearing story, and some really fun scenarios.
While I still enjoy Sonic Adventure 2, I never bothered to play it for that long. I don't hate the game, but I feel the reality is that it's too much of a good thing. They did focus on the things that made Adventure fun, like the action stages, but to me, they lost the creativity and imagination that came with it as a whole. Now to the devs, however, they considered it their absolute best efforts at the time, and I heavily respect that. It's still a fun game with a good story and introduced one of the most iconic characters in the franchise, but it's not my favorite. I'd play it over certain games, but definitely not over the predecessor.
That's it for now, but please join us next time when we talk about Sonic's 3D era as it continues to run down its path without Sega consoles. In part 2, we'll be talking about Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog.